Welcome to the France debate. The CIA's new director is in Turkey to talk about a new strategy against the Islamic State group. The visit by Mike Pompeo has been overshadowed somewhat by an accidental airstrike on Turkish soldiers in Syria, a strike carried out by Russian jets. This confirmed by the Kremlin, confirmed to have been a friendly fire incident. But when the dust settles, will this affect the cooperation between Russia and the Turks against the Islamic State group? Russia and Turkey both backing Bashar al-Assad. The United States so far has been committed to Assad leaving power in Syria. Could that all change now Donald Trump's in the White House? Trump talking up, of course, warming relations with Vladimir Putin, recalibrating the Washington-Moscow dynamic. Well, the talks in Turkey could have a far-reaching impact on the Syria crisis, on the fight against the Islamic State group, and, of course, on the Russia-US relationship. Meanwhile, on the ground, the most pressing issue is the taking of the city of al-Bab. Those soldiers we spoke about killed in an airstrike near to al-Bab in Aleppo province. Assad's troops, backed by Russia, Iran and Hezbollah, on the brink, it's reported, of taking territory in the grip of the jihadists. So can the US coordinate with Turkey and, by extension, with Russia and Iran to focus on the fight to take Raqqa, the de facto capital of the Islamic State group? So where does Turkey stand? The whole situation very complexly balanced indeed. Let me introduce to you our guests for this France 24 debate. Michele Waldman is the researcher for Amnesty International, joining us from London. Michele, thank you for being with us. Aaron Etzion, former National Security Advisor to Israel, is joining us from Prague. Aaron, thank you for being with us too. By phone from Beirut in Lebanon.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome,
Yes.
sir. Delays in sound, something we'll have to try and manage here via our sound department. Joining us by phone from Beirut in Lebanon, Robert Fisk, the Middle East correspondent for The Independent. And Gulnar Aybet is in London, Professor of International Relations at the Bashar University and Director of the Centre for Security Studies. Thank you all for being with us. I'd like to start with Nicolette of Amnesty International. What would you expect from this visit by Mike Pompeo to Turkey? What would you hope to hear from it? What do you expect to happen?
What I'm here today to talk about is a report that we released on Tuesday, which deals with a calculated campaign of mass hangings and extermination. So that's the topic that I'm prepared to speak about today. Oh,
the mass hangings and exterminations. You're talking about the events in Syria with 13,000 deaths since...
That's right.
Okay.
In our report, yeah.
Okay, well, that's fine, that's fine. Will you expect some action from Mike Pompeo on this issue?
I would hope some action, and ready to speak more about detainees.
Okay, well, that's fine. Well, feel free to join in whenever we can. I'll bring in the other guests to get an instant reaction from them before we come back to you. Aaron Etzion, former National Security Advisor to Israel, joining us from Prague. The situation in Turkey, of course, is very finely balanced. And what happens, of course, there could affect very greatly what happens in the rest of the Middle East. So when someone like Mike Pompeo makes it his first port of call, his first official appointment, what does that suggest to you about the aims and objectives from Washington?
Yes, you're right. It is very interesting and very telling, and it comes 48 hours after a phone discussion between President Trump and Erdogan, which reportedly was a good one. Obviously, there are plenty of tensions and dilemmas for the US in the Middle East in general, and specifically in Syria. The first dilemma that they are facing and will face as we go along is with their relations, obviously, with Russia. It appears that Trump is intent on restarting relations between the US and Russia in a positive way. And he's going to get into various dilemmas because of Russia's interests and actions on the ground. That pertains to Turkey, because we all remember that the Russian-Turkish relations just saw a major crisis and a major recuperation from the crisis towards what appears to be now almost a perfect alignment of interests as far as Syria is concerned. And we're going to have to see to what extent the US will be able to maneuver between those conflicting powers. I would just say that as far as I can read the American interest in Syria, it is not going to be a major shift with respect to the Obama's policy in Syria, which by and large is a standoff approach. We're not going to see any major American involvement with Turkey or with Syria or with others. I believe we're going to see basically an allowance by Trump to mainly the Russians, the Iranians, and to some extent the Turks. He will allow them basically to divide, if you want, divide and conquer Syria between them, with the US playing a very modest role. If you want, it's going to be his version of staying behind and not even leading. That would be my forecast.
So, Aaron, when Donald Trump talks about establishing humanitarian corridors, those kind of things, one might imagine you need to get troops on the ground to do that. Do you think this is just basically something that he said and won't actually happen?
They're not going to be American.
There won't be American troops?
No, I think he's going to make... There won't be American troops. I'm convinced of that. There might be Turkish troops. There might be, you know, even Iranian troops, Syrian troops. They're not going to be American. The most of the boots on the ground that you're going to see that are made in America are going to be advisors, special forces, a lot like Obama. You're not going to see any major American presence in those corridors or elsewhere in Syria.
Aaron Etzion, bear with us for a moment. I'll bring in some of our other guests. That's Aaron Etzion, the former National Security Advisor to Israel, speaking to us from Prague. Let's bring in from Beirut, Robert Fisk, a Middle East correspondent for The Independent. Robert, good evening to you. In terms of what you might expect to hear coming out of Ankara when Mr. Pompeo and President Erdogan sit down, are you expecting anything ground-shaking to arise?
Well, what they're going to say is not what they're going to do. I think it's probably very bad news for the Kurds in northern Syria. Turkey would not be collaborating with the United States in any way if the Americans were holding out any hope for the Kurds, who've been their allies, of course, against ISIS in northern Syria, of having a statelet running along the Turkish border. It's probably very dangerous news for Fethullah Gulen, the man whom Erdogan wants returned from the United States. I don't think Obama would probably not send him back, but I don't think Trump would have the slightest hesitation in doing so and labeling him an Islamist terrorist. So I think it's very bad news for him too. I don't think a single American is going to be sent into Syria, or they may be sent to Ankara to talk to the Turkish military. I do think that America wants control over whom Raqqa falls to. The Syrian army have made some advances in that direction, and I think the Americans, and I'm sure the Turks, would far rather that the ISIS capital in Syria fell to them, so to speak, and their allies, than fell to the Syrian government army, which would then say, well, you can't come here, we've already liberated the city. I would think that they'll be also talking about what message Erdogan can send to Putin, which he will discuss with Putin, what he said to Michael Pompeo. Interesting that Pompeo did his military service in the Cold War frontier, so he knows quite a lot about borders. I wonder if he will be taken confidentially and quietly down to the Turkish-Syrian border.
To take a look at the situation where, of course, we've reported extensively on the conflicts there. And Robert, I know you have too. The situation there remains tense, doesn't it?
Yes. You've got to realize that the Turks, when you're in Turkey and you go down to the border, as I was a few weeks ago, you realize that the Kurds are worrying the Turks much more than ISIS is. They've got ISIS there as a raison d'etre for being inside Syria, but the great concern of the Kurds is that the KDP, the leftist Marxist group, which actually fought its way into part of Nusaybin not many weeks ago, will effectively demand a statelet along that border. That is what the Turks are primarily interested in. So Pompeo's visit is bad news for Kurds and possibly bad news for Mr. Gulen.
Robert, bear with us, please. We'll bring you back in after we've heard from our next guest, Gulnar Aybet, joining us from London. Gulnar, I hope you can hear us. I understand we've had a few problems just re-establishing our link with you, but I'm told now we can go ahead and speak. Director of Security Studies Centre and Professor of International Relations. Your take on this visit. Would you have anything different to say? Do you see sort of something coming, particularly for Turkey, out of this?
I must say I did lose the sound during your last two guests, so...
go ahead and speak and don't worry about repeating things, it's fine.
Yes, yeah. Okay.
Go ahead.
So I'm not sure exactly what was said right before me, but I can tell you that this is a very significant visit for the director of the CIA to be here on his first foreign visit, and it comes very closely after Presidents Trump and Erdogan had this phone conversation, which lasted about 45 minutes, and they agreed that they would cooperate in liberating both al-Bab and Raqqa from Daesh. And I think this was quite significant. It also President Erdogan reiterated during that phone call that the US must stop aiding the YPG and the PYD, which are armed extensions of the PKK, which is recognized as a terrorist organization by the United States and the EU. And if we look at the statements coming from President Trump in the last few weeks, and he's been saying, not just President Trump, but also Vice President Pence have also said this, and that Turkey is a long-standing ally and a NATO ally, and the US needs to work with Turkey in Syria. And I think those statements, are not just said for the sake of it. And I think Turkey's requests will be taken seriously by this administration. And there are two requests. One is stop cooperating with the YPG, because the Obama administration's argument that this YPG is the only effective fighting force on the ground has been seriously refuted since Operation Euphrates Shield began, and Turkey has made a lot of advances. In fact, Turkey has achieved more in eliminating Daesh targets and militants than the whole coalition put together under this operation in a short space of time. And I think, with that said, it's very clear that these demands by Turkey will be taken seriously. Of course, another thing that they will be talking about in this visit is how to harmonize both the Turkish proposal and the US proposal for a safe zone in Syria. And as you know, the Turkish proposal was first put forward in 2011, and Turkey has reiterated since then the necessity for this safe zone, first for its own security in securing its border, and secondly to ensure a place where Syrian refugees can return and people in that area can be safely lodged. Now, President Trump surprisingly has said that also that there's a need for a safe zone. It's something the Obama administration were not interested in. What will have to be discussed is how these two proposals can be harmonized, and then how the safe zone proposal can be harmonized with the Astana process. And as we know, the United States is a little wary of the Astana process because it's between Turkey, Iran, and Russia as three guarantors. But the United States also know that Astana can actually deliver results. And it's within, of course, the whole framework of Geneva. But whereas Geneva sort of paints out the broader picture, in Astana we're seeing results delivered such as the ceasefire and the evacuation of the civilians from Aleppo. But also, it can deliver results with regards to a political process, because all parties are approaching each other in a much more realistic way. So all of these things will be discussed, but I think Turkey can also play an important role here with regards to the Russia-Iran-US triangle. Because, of course, Russia backs Iran to some extent, but they also have serious disagreements about the involvement of US in Astana. But on the other hand, the Syrian opposition rebels are also against Iran taking place in Astana because of the Shia militias. And I think Turkey, as a country that can talk to and work with all three parties, as well as the rebels, has a significant role to play here. And I think that is also something that will be on the agenda of Director Pompeo's visit.
Well, now let me pause you there. Thank you very much indeed. I understand you are actually in Ankara. I said you're in London, so sleight of hand there. You're actually...
I was going to correct you on that as well. Thank you.
No problem at all. So you are in Ankara, which
right.
lends even more credibility to your presence.
Yes.
Thank you very much for being there. And we'll ask you about reaction from Ankara in a moment. We've dealt with the kind of, I suppose, the geopolitical aspect of this. Nicolette Waldman, we can come back to you now to talk a little bit more about what you've discovered as Amnesty International, what your report has discovered, and an indication of the horrors that have been going on, as well as all the talking and all the diplomacy, which is important to try to find solutions, people suffering. Remind us about what your report has found. Remind us about the scale of the killing that's been going on.
What we found over the course of 1 year of research is that the Syrian authorities have been carrying out a calculated campaign of mass hangings and extermination in Sednaya prison in Syria. And basically, every week, and often twice a week, groups of up to 50 people are taken from their cells and taken over to another prison, another building on the grounds of the prison, and they are hanged to death. Before they are hanged, they undergo a 1 or 2 minute farcical procedure where the detainees are condemned to death. Not one of these detainees who are hanged is given anything that even has a semblance to a trial. And in the backdrop to this, the detainees are subjected to horrific conditions. And we have actually found that the Syrian authorities are deliberately inflicting repeated torture in combination with a systematic deprivation of food, water, medicine, and medical care, which is causing massive numbers of deaths. And the deaths that people are dying are horrible. They are dying of starvation, of thirst, of infections, and of completely treatable diseases. So we're really pushing the world to take notice to these abuses which take place behind closed doors, out of the access of international human rights monitors, and to bring this back up to be the top of the agenda. Because as you said, this affects tens of thousands of people who are detained, arrested, tortured, many of whom are then killed. And then to think about also their family members. All of these people are going to need some kind of sense of justice, accountability for what's been done.
Would you hope that some pressure could be put onto the Assad regime from the discussions that are going ahead in Ankara to amend, to change their ways, or is this something you've basically written off as just the way it is?
It cannot be the way it is. There can be no business as usual until these massive crimes against humanity are addressed. And as the numbers indicate, these are not small-scale or sporadic, even isolated war crimes. These are widespread, systematic, continual crimes that we have found, and as well other human rights organizations have found, the United Nations have found, to be the crimes of murder, disappearance, torture, and now extermination in the prisons. So really, crimes of this scale have to be addressed. And there will be no just and sustainable peace until the international community addresses these abuses. And what we want to see first is a thorough and independent investigation